But I want to ask you to comment on how governments can design and adopt innovative digital solutions, but remaining human-centered.
With the idea of wanting to be proactive when our services are provided, with open by default processes that bring the users into the service design process and that are data-driven, because data can help us understand the needs of the users. So in that sense, being human-centered means focusing on the user, being able to put the voice and the need of the user at the core of the service design and delivery process, and remember that it's not about technology. Like Gerd said, as long as we keep focusing on efficiency, we will not be human-centered, because we will not put the human at the core, but we will put the government at the core.
Thank you. Shai-Lee, I want to bring you into the conversation because, as Barbara said, technology, of course, has to keep the human and at the heart of what's being done, but also that you can have big data and how you use that. Some people are concerned that the government's ability to gather more and more information, and we saw that especially during COVID, where we were all willingly giving up our information to try to face this pandemic, can be used in concerning ways, including surveillance. So how did you tackle that? What would be your advice to governments?
Yeah, well, it is a big challenge because technology keeps advancing all the time, and governments are not advancing at the same pace of technology, unfortunately, and governments should keep very cautious and very risk-averse because they're trading with the population. So, in my opinion, government has to create policies and regulation that can address these issues in terms of privacy, security. These regulation and policies should be comprehensive enough on one hand, but letting technology keep flexibility, which is quite a challenge because the technology keeps changing all the time, and sometimes the policy and regulation are not, competing with that at the same pace. I think the data is here already. We can't avoid that. So the question is not about collecting the data. It's about how you protect the data and how you make sure it's being good for the good use. The presentation we just saw demonstrate that exactly. So we can do it. We can use that data and that technology for doing good or not for not doing good. We don't have an option of not collecting the data. It's over there. There are companies collecting the data. There's government collecting the data. It's open. It's there. It's in the media, social media. So I think government role is exactly there on that crossroad, is to decide what and how and when to use that data, and make sure that we take all the ethics in that consideration.
Camilo, I want to turn to you and to build up on that, because of course we're talking about efficiency and how using technology can help governments become more efficient. And efficiency isn't just about speed and getting things done quicker, but it also includes tackling corruption or any loopholes that can allow systems to be manipulated. So can you tell us how technology can help in that?
Well, thanks for the question. I would think that there are at least 4 key things we could consider when we talk about technology and improvement of government. So the first thing is technology can help us do things better and simpler. Second thing is it will help us reduce transaction costs. And particularly when we think about transaction costs, we have to bear in mind that there are legal transaction costs and illegal transaction costs, and that's where corruption comes in. So when we have technology helping us reduce red tape, helping us tackle those transaction costs, we have a better way, a simpler way, and a less costly way of doing stuff. Third thing is technology will help us collect data that will help us at the same time to build better policy to solve problems that people are actually facing. And when we talk about human-centered digital technology and government solutions, we need to think about that. We need information that can help us solve the problems. Last thing I would bring to the discussion is interoperability. When we have this information where we are collecting data that is human-centered, then we can solve solutions for actual people. All of this can be enhanced by using new technologies such as blockchain, such as machine learning, such as artificial intelligence, to eliminate biases, to reduce this red tape, and to find more efficient and effective solutions to humans' problems.
I want to come back to the stereotyping, because often people worry that our own biases are built into the technology that is human-made. And I think that's something that's worth considering, how governments can tackle that, how international organizations, but also organizations that work on this. So, Bernardo, if you could address that in terms of the role of technology and how we have to make sure that culturally, and I know part of your work is to democratize culture, and then how that builds into that efficient government, but that also remains human-centered.
Thank you so much. I think it's also a challenge for Mexico. I'm managing the cultural diplomacy of the country. We have a very big challenge now in the administration of President López Obrador. First of all, we are fighting against corruption. We are fighting and developing new technologies to increase the trust of the citizens. That's very important. First of all, we need to have the trust. We need to work every single day to lower the cost, to, of course, increase the transparency of the processes in all the institutions of Mexico. That's very important because even worldwide, we have this reputation, and we are also fighting against that. And the only way to fight against that is credibility, is trust, and that is a work hard every single day.
And like, as you said, transparency being so important to trust. Shai-Lee, can I ask you to comment also about this idea of biases being built into technology and what government can do to make sure that it's not there?
That's one of the risks, especially in terms of transparency and trust, because the citizens do not trust equality, for example. If the machine decides who goes into the country and the border controls, and they decide that blue eye or green eye people would not go in, that's a machine. But we need to make sure that we eliminate these kinds of inequalities, or not rational decisions, not unethical decisions. Now the problem is that with AI and machine learning, the machine makes their own, and learning and improving. And if we start interfering in the algorithm, that's not AI anymore. On the other hand, you make sure that you can have the explainability, understand how the machines are built. So I think governments' regulation, especially in terms of AI and machine learning, and when machine makes their own decision and decision-making and interfere in the decision-making, make sure that you have the understanding of how that machine works, what ethics rules goes into, what are requirements goes into this algorithm, and make sure it eliminates inequalities and unfair decision-making.
Barbara, can I ask you about the design element in systems for governments or in the OECD? I mean, you're talking about over 50 countries coming together. So how does the design of these sorts of technologies help governments and supranational entities be more efficient?
Yeah, I always like to talk about the design of the outcome you want to produce. For example, the design of the service that you want to deliver, and then how you use technology to support the delivery of that specific design. And I think that right now, especially after COVID, we realize to what extent it's important to strengthen the capacity to design the service nationally, but also collectively, to be able to serve citizens across borders. There are important conversations happening. For example, the Green Pass in Europe was a great concrete way to serve citizens moving across borders. And there are ongoing conversations to say, how can we learn from that experience, and what are the obstacles that we need to overcome? Are there barriers from a legal point of view, for example, that impede countries from sharing data that enable to design services that serve citizens across borders? So I think that focusing on the design of the outcome we want to produce and thinking that citizens in a global world move around, like the pandemic demonstrated, is the way forward, and we need to work collectively and collaborate, like the previous speaker said.
Camilo, what do you think the biggest learning has been from the use of data and information during the pandemic, but also how can that be utilized in other circumstances?
Say that the first lesson is we had too little information. When we were trying to solve the problems and the challenges, we realized we didn't have enough information to actually solve the problems. For example, in Colombia, we realized that the information about people with very low income was not enough to allow us identify who should be prioritized at the hour of public spending or of just giving money to people so they would not starve, like literally. So that's the first thing. Second thing is we found out that there was this very big tension that had not been solved yet between data privacy and between the need to collect information for the government to take decisions. And the third thing is we didn't have enough cybersecurity tools to ensure that information that had been collected would not be utilized wrongfully. So we have seen in some countries, for example, such information being used for political purposes, like for electoral purposes. So there are three particular challenges there. And I would like to add, going to something that Barbara was mentioning, going back a bit, I do think that governments need to design technology in an open way, thinking not just in citizens that are within a frame of a particular state, but we need to think of citizens of the world. And we need to start thinking of this kind of information more globally. In the European Union, probably it is more straightforward to think about this. But in countries like Colombia or maybe in Mexico, we still do not have this kind of thinking. We need to move forward in that direction.
And of course, and I think that's exactly the challenge. I told you before, it's about the trust of the citizens and even the institutions. And to go a step forward and to go, to invest, we need to build bridges between nations. We need to build bridges even with our neighbors, the States, Canada, of course, South America, Central America, to believe again. And I think it's a fact that we need to invest, and we are doing this investment in technologies, of course, in a lot of tools, even with your country, with Israel, with many countries in the world, and we're investing in innovation. For us, it's very important. Innovation, is like a motto for Mexico, and we are growing up on that. Even every ministry in Mexico, even we are fighting with the role of women. Even for us is very important. Innovation with people of determination, with the public feminist policy. So it's part also of this credibility and trust for going a step forward.
We're at the World Government Summit. And if someone is in government and they're trying to think how I can best utilize technology today, so there are certain things that everybody has picked up, but what is that one emerging technology that you would advise people should invest in or governments should invest in? And Shai-Lee, I'll start with you.
I would say differ between country and country. So I would first, if I was a government wants to adopt, I would first build a strategy of my country, see where the challenges are, see where the pace of technology adoption is, see where the gaps are, and then decide. If the country is advanced and developed and there's enough technology and enough technology adoption, I would go to probably using AI or voice recognition or things like that. If, for example, if the country is not digital literacy enough, I may use voice recognition because elderly people with no technology background can use it better. So I would choose the technology based on the needs and challenges and gaps of my specific country. There's no one solution fits all. It's not a copy-paste. It's a strategic agenda for that country.
Barbara?
I actually will echo this reply by saying that I think it's the purpose of the choice that matters. So what's the strategic goal, the problem that the government is trying to solve that should lead the decision on the technology to be applied? A former digital leader of an OECD country said if governments were using the technology they had already in-house without thinking about adopting a disruptive technology, it would already be a good starting point. And I would like to conclude by echoing also something we said before, that technology, especially emerging tech, without data, in many cases don't lead to the result we want to achieve. So there's no strategy focused on technology that cannot acknowledge the importance of data and having data-driven approaches and recognizing the value of data as a key strategic asset.
I would just add the importance of choosing technology that actually helps to solve the problems that citizens want to be solved. Sometimes governments are just providing solutions for things that nobody cares about. If you go and look to what happens in Argentina, for example, in terms of needs, demands of transparency, you know what people really wanted? They didn't even really want so much like public procurement, for example, information. I mean, it was like, of course it should happen. But what people wanted some years ago was transparency, information, and tools to have access to information of what had happened during the dictatorship. That's what people wanted. If you go and see what people demand in Colombia, people are requiring transparency in the environmental licenses that are being adjudicated, given to companies doing oil and gas extractive operations. So we need solutions, we need transparency, we need technology to improve services, but always oriented to solving people's needs.
I agree. I agree with my colleagues. In Mexico, we launched a national digital strategy in 2020, and the project is until 24. But we are now running and having the vision, learning of this country and learning after our participation in Expo 2020 Dubai, how's the plan for the future, how we can collaborate with more countries, companies, institutions, and grow up the transparency that for us is the statement of this government now in this administration period.
Barbara, I want to ask you about this element of efficiency and how we can square that with the fact that a lot of the technology companies, of course, are private institutions, and also government is often using private technologies. So how you can bring the two together, but also making sure you're doing it in the most efficient way that isn't costing too much.
Well, the thing is that so far, whenever the partnership was happening between public sector and private sector, it was not happening on an equal ground, meaning in many cases, the public sector was exposed to products and solutions that were offered by the private sector, which did not have a good understanding and knowledge of the dynamics, the needs, of the characteristics internally within the house in the public sector. So I think we need to rethink the collaboration and between the public and the private, starting from when, for example, the need is identified for which a solution needs to be brought into the house. And that's why I go back to the idea of having these open processes of defining a need, rethinking procurement, not only to make it more transparent, but to make it more collaborative. So I think efficiency will come from the fact not that I paid the best price, but that I brought into the house the technical solution that best responds to my needs as a public sector. But for that to happen, there needs to be like a conversation, a collaboration, and an exchange between the public and the private, which so far has not been the focus of any public procurement process, for example.
Thank you so much for your time. Please thank our panelists.
Mina, thank you so much. Nice to meet you.